Well, I think I'll go ahead and get started. I'd like to call the September 16th, 2014 Longmont City Council study session to order. Could we please start with the roll call?
Mayor Coombs?
Here.
Council members Bagley?
Here.
Christensen?
Here.
Finley?
Here.
Levison?
Here.
Moore?
Here.
Santos?
Here.
Mayor, you have a quorum?
Okay, let's stand for pledge allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Public invited to be heard. Doesn't look like we have anybody that's signed up today, do we? Do we have a list?
Could we get somebody coming off the street?
Wow. Okay.
You're lonely up here.
I thought with water being the hot topic, people would be here to talk about fluoride, but all right. Is there anybody in the audience that'd like to address the council at this time? I guess seeing no one, I'll close public invited to be heard. So now it's time for the special study items.
Mayor, the first item is the Integrated Treated Water Supply Master Plan, and it looks like Dale Rademacher and Bob Allen are here to present.
Yes. Yeah.
All right. I'm Bob Allen. Well, hello. Well, it's going to be one of those nights. Huh? I like that. I'm Operations Manager of Public Works and Natural Resources, and wanted to discuss our water utility master plan this evening. I'll give you the 30-minute version, but I'm happy to give you the 4-hour version if you want instead. So that's the version where you ask me questions every slide. So let me start with a few major issues that kind of drove the purpose of this plan. The executive summary that we published with the council notebook has a few more items than what I have here, but really you can distill these down to these 5. One, we currently have 2 water plants, an old one and a new one, and we may need to make decisions about what we're going to do with the older one. Secondly, we have a raw water system and a potable water distribution system that needs some work, renewal, and some work looking into the future capacity needs. Third, we have a need to identify what capacity will meet our build-out needs, or at least close to our build-out needs, including those for the town of Lyons and for hygiene, the community of hygiene. And then we need to look at risks associated with our water utility, and some of these concepts we have addressed in the plan. And then finally, a capital plan that we can build kind of a revenue plan around. So these were the main kind of main drivers. We obviously had spent a lot of time in recent years looking at our raw water system, so I'm going to not emphasize that piece of it as much, but we'll certainly go into some of the high points with raw water as well. And then a last piece here that is kind of pervasive throughout all of our utilities, and you've heard us talk about it a lot here in recent years, is the concept of our aging assets that are reaching, many of which are reaching life cycle and need to be renewed here in future years, and some in the near future. Dale Rademacher shared an article from the Rotarian last month, and it was a good article. It was pretty insightful, actually, and it talked about, and I provided a copy there at your seats. It talked about our focus externally, and particularly in developing countries and other countries that come to our to us for aid and assistance, and we have a lot of outward focus, and I think sometimes the problem is so big at home that it's easy for us to kind of ignore that and focus externally. And the article was actually, I thought, pretty interesting because it looked beyond just aging assets and into newer technologies and what will take us into the future in this country as well. And it is easy to overlook that, and I'm hoping this master plan kind of addresses that, takes us a little bit into the future. This article was in Sunday's Denver Post. I caught it in the morning reading it, and it deals with some of the problem that we're all also facing in the U.S. and in the world, and that's in particular our distribution systems for potable water, which are buried and out of sight, out of mind, are easy to overlook. And this article really kind of focused on a lot of problems that they have in Denver. And by the way, Denver Water does a pretty good job, and they meet the industry standards for the breaks they have in their system, but they also had to ask the Colorado Rockies not to have a baseball game about a month ago because of a break outside the stadium. So that's a pretty major issue to have to face as a community, and one you'd like to avoid. So our plan also is looking into renewing assets before they become really a catastrophic failure point for us. So some guiding principles, and these came from a couple years ago and some work that our staff did with the Water Board, but they were certainly good guiding principles. Maintaining high water quality in our raw water system, protecting and improving that system and the quality of that water. Flexibility in water supply is certainly the name of the game anymore. We don't have the crystal ball, so being able to develop in a flexible manner. And then partnerships both in the supply, raw water side and in the treated water side. So we certainly have developed that in the raw water side, and I think our future might be possibly more into the potable water production and provision side of the equation. So it's called an integrated plan, and I thought a week ago as I was working on the presentation, we use that term integrated. What does that really mean? In the case of water supply, it's a very appropriate term. We have really an extremely complex system compared really even to our sewer system. You've got three major elements to it: your raw water supply, your potable treatment, and then your potable distribution. And those all need to line up with regards to capacity and the availability to deliver water from our watershed to our customer. We have a service and we have a product. Our customers interact with that product daily, which makes that very unique for our utility services, in that they detect quality issues if there are issues. And then you have public health regulations that are very complex in the potable water industry. And the difference here, in the case of our sewer utility, which we've talked to you about recently and had a recent master plan in that utility, we get all the regulations that come into the state, and the state distills those down into a single permit that they give us for a 3-year period. And they give us very quantifiable standards, and they even tell us, in this case of our most recent one, if we need to develop for a new standard, and they gave us some exemptions for a period of time to do that development. Well, there is no permit to produce drinking water. Anyone can do it as long as you comply with the federal standards, of which there are many. And so you have to detect and discern what it is that you're going to do to make that provision and treatment of potable water for your community work for you and comply with your regulatory bodies, state, federal, and even local in some cases. We have really complex assets in water treatment. Water rights are a very complicated and important part of the assets that the city owns. We've got multiple properties and extensive right-of-way to deliver drinking water to our community. A lot of those properties and that right-of-way are in multiple jurisdictions and with multiple partners, so they become very complicated. We have, and that's probably the other big issue, is the number of partners we have in delivering potable water. We have them on the raw water side, we've got wholesale customers, and then we have a lot of environmental planning within the jurisdictions that we operate within. So all of this requires a lot of integration work to make that all come together so we have drinking water at the tap. And then one last, challenge and some context I'd like to provide that we rarely talk about is really the context for planning. And this, we use this term master planning, and really a master plan for a utility is a strategic plan for that utility that's kind of subordinate to a comp plan. And this tells us how we need to control our destiny moving forward. It's cause and effect. And that plan has two major dimensions that we have to consider in the process. The first is time. So we're working from today out to some future and having to have a plan that meets that future need. And in this case, out to 2033. And the other dimension is the dimension of the variables you control. So we have variables we own and control, and we know, for example, that Wade Gaddis is an outdated facility, and we have to do something about that, and we have full control of that facility. On the other hand, there are a lot of variables we don't control, such as regional, economic, and business trends that we may somewhat indirectly control through a comp plan, but we don't necessarily directly control. So as we work through a plan, and the four quadrants this really creates, this one up in the upper left corner is an easy one to address. We know we have Wade Gaddis. We know it's outdated and it is at the end of its life cycle. We know we have to do something about it. And we know what demand or what its function is. And so it's very easy to develop a specific plan for that. So that's an easy, predictable landscape with specific plans. And those are the things that we tend to bring to you when we're working on the revenue side of the equation, on rates. The other near-term factors that we address are these uncontrollable factors. What new business may come into Longmont in the next year or 2 years, and how will we meet their needs? And so that's moderately predictable. We have a comp plan, and we're talking to people. We may have some ideas of that, but we don't fully control it. So in this case, our plans need to be flexible. So if we know that in 10 years we need, let's say, 30 to 40 million gallons of additional daily capacity, maybe we build that in a modular way. Instead of building all 30 and 40 and risk stranding some of it, we may build 10 and then 20 and 30, or we may build 15 and 15. So flexible plans tend to work best in that quadrant. Where we have controllable but further term factors, we tend to deal more with multiple options. Will we build additional treatment capacity, or maybe we'll partner with a nearby utility and develop an interconnect system so that they can provide some of our customers, or maybe we, instead of stranding capacity, build it and supply out to them. Lions would be an example of that. And then finally, this fourth quadrant is what we know the least about, and most master plans don't really get into many specifics here, other than to know what we may see. We may see a build-out, for example, of 112 residents. We don't know that for a fact. It might be more or might be less. And our plans need to be not only flexible here, but pretty open, so that we know what to do here. But the name of this game is to not build a lot of assets that get stranded and you spent money on and you can't use. Everything, though, requires some level of verification before we start designing and building. So this is probably something that we do very well internally, and I don't think we've made many mistakes of over-projecting or under-projecting. I think we've done a really good job, and you can count on us to continue to do that. So I'm going to go fairly quickly through this. You've got the executive summary, and I don't want to bore you with the details, and I'm happy to answer any questions tonight or in follow-up too. And we will also be coming back with some future related presentations where we might need to answer more specific questions too, and we'll talk. Dale will talk a little bit more about that toward the end of the presentation. So our raw water system, this is a map that came out of the master plan. I just show it here to show it. It's a pretty extensive system, starting up here in the headwaters of the St. Vrain all the way down to Union Reservoir are the components of it that are in our direct ownership. And then obviously with, or via Northern Water, we own quite a bit, not only north of Longmont, but over into the western slope. Major plan drivers for the raw water system. We have had a recent raw water master plan, I believe 2012, and conservation plans. We did not spend a lot of time here other than to make sure that they were compatible with everything else we needed to do in the utility, or vice versa. So we used the demand projections. They spent a lot of time working on very good, average daily demand projections in that planning effort, and those were very helpful in this plan. We did add or supplement that with this second bullet, which is really looking at kind of the future focus on watershed management and issues we may face in the future, everything from wildfires to nuisance algae in the system. And then obviously, as of a year ago, we had a flood, and that has changed some of our priorities over the last year and probably over the next few years as we rebuild some of the system that was damaged. So future demand projections was a big part of this plan, and also one of the most challenging parts. It's pretty easy to project a few years out. It's a lot more difficult to get further out. There are a lot of factors that can influence that. We're at 90,000 now. We have at least in our current comp plan, a projection of 113,000 residents that build out. We show a current imbalance right now being about 80% of that anticipated build-out population, but only about 52% of the commercial residential build-out. So that's probably something to address in our future updates to our comp plan. But it does, it gives us some consideration for how we develop in the future. Right now, we produce about, as a maximum, 32 million gallons per day on our peak day in the summer. Our projected build-out need is at 57. Once again, it's hard to know if we'll hit that number or if we may be higher than that number. What we did do was take some time to look at what we have been producing and look at the history and try to project from that what we might look like. That's where that 57 number comes from. If you look at it, the selected option, which was a 1.75% growth on average, whether or not that's the case is probably less important. That we know that it's a potential outcome, and we need to be able to, hit on either side of that in the future. So that's where that quadrant showing the need for flexibility is important for us. This is a Boulder County map. Let me see if I can come down here and highlight my pen. If you look up in here, you'll see in our St. Vrain watershed up in this region a couple of areas here where we have the potential for wildfire. And the potential is severe. It's probably a matter of when, not if, and it's something we'll face someday in the watershed, and we'll need to be able to address that in the future. So, let's see if I can get my cursor back here. Might have to come down here and restore it. So the plan did address, at least from the planning perspective, what it is that we might want to know about if we had a wildfire. I think our staff was pretty well aware of the potential impacts, but it was really good to go through the exercise of revisiting what it is we may face if we had a major fire in the system. Obviously, increased flood flows, mobilization of metals and organics that are bound up in the watershed now and cause water quality impacts, fouling, debris buildup in reservoirs. I thought this slide, I actually thought this was, I kind of chuckled when I read this. I underlined this point here that, for example, Longmont Reservoir could be used as a sediment trap. Well, that's exactly what it was during the flood, so we know that it functions, whether we like it or not, as a sediment trap. So having that understanding was pretty important to us. And once again, going through this exercise of really thinking through what it might look like and what we might do, the steps we might take to mitigate. And it's hard to get emotionally wrapped around this when you don't have a wildfire or you haven't had to address one recently in your watershed, but as was the flood, it could be pretty significant for us and something that we need to focus on. Major projects here, you've heard these in other presentations, our Windy Gap firming project. We've talked about repairs to our north pipeline. A fair amount of that line is pretty old and deteriorated, and we will not be able to count on that being there, certainly in perpetuity, and probably not for the next 20 years, parts of it. And we need to plan for the future of either abandoning parts or replacing parts of it. And then looking out into the future, this Union Reservoir pumpback project as an option for meeting future supplies. Potable water treatment, future demand, we had to take the demand projections that we had on the raw water studies and cast those in terms of maximum days instead of the average demand. Treatment plants need to be built around what your maximum production need might be on a given day when everyone is running irrigation for their lawns on a hot 100-degree day. That was very helpful in taking a look at those numbers. Compliance challenges. We have noted a lot of algae growing in our watershed, and algae creates taste and odor issues and filter plugging issues that we've had to address. Wade Gaddis, as I've mentioned, is at the end of its life cycle and requires considerations. And then looking out into the future, potential interconnections with other communities, either to receive potable water from those communities or to supply it, whatever it is that best meets our needs and interests. This kind of divides up the planning phases really more for potable water treatment because we know that Wade Gaddis has exceeded its life cycle or at its life cycle. We're in the short-term phase of needing to replace the capacity that it supplies to the city. We have gone through a re-rating of the Nelson Flanders plant. That was actually a recommendation that came out of this plan, and we, before the plan was complete, started working on that and have achieved that approval and have successfully re-rated the plant and have actually demonstrated it at those higher levels. That's a huge cost savings for us for now because it buys us time to really think about what we want to do, to firmly replace that future supply. Whether or not we want to continue to operate that plant at its higher re-rated capacity is really a matter of how quickly it consumes those assets that are currently in place there and whether or not that has much of an impact. And we should be able to measure that over the next few years and see if that's going to be a high cost to us or whether or not maybe we seek to operate that existing facility at that higher rate. So currently it's rated at 30 MGD out the door, and it is re-rated now at 40 MGD out the door. So that's a pretty good increase. We looked at the possibility of renewing Wade Gaddis and adding to that facility. And I'll talk a little bit about the constraints there and why we chose not to go that route in this master plan. But it did require some new technologies and retrofits on site that would have allowed it to continue to operate. Nelson Flanders was built to be expanded, specifically to be doubled in size from 30 to 60 MGD. It would require the addition of a new forebay and then the expansion, mirror image expansion of our sedimentation and filtration process, and then a new disinfection train. But some of that infrastructure is already in place for that expansion. Some of the drivers, though, for that decision, Wade Gaddis only currently functions in a standby mode, and we do feel that it is currently reliable for treatment, but we can't guarantee it's going to last much longer. The problem there is that it is the metastructure, the actual foundation for the facility is failing, and it could fail to a point to where a wall could fall apart or it couldn't hold water, and that could be even catastrophically, so we can't get to the point where we rely on it now for a firm supply, but it does provide still a backup mode of operation for us. The size is really pretty marginal for a conventional plant. Even if we could fit all the infrastructure on there, it's not likely that we could move trucks in and out of there very easily to surface that infrastructure, to deliver chemicals and equipment to it, so it's pretty constrained. It is more expensive if we were to pursue renewing that facility. It's not a full scrape, but it's almost a scrape off and rebuild to use that site, and it's not a great site. It also sits right next to the highway, which kind of presents some risks for us as well. It's more vulnerable than our Nelson Flanders plant, which is tucked away. Nelson Flanders was built for expansion, and that's the cheaper option, though just the cost didn't drive all of our consideration, but it certainly was an important one. If we, and our projection now is to expand Nelson Flanders instead, it would require some additional redundancy to minimize the risk of moving everything into one facility. And then, as I mentioned, it's already been rated up to 40 MGD, so we're putting eggs in that basket even now. One of the major regulations that we face in water treatment is what's called the Surface Water Treatment Rule. Surface Water Treatment Rule addresses the removal of pathogens from water, and it does that by saying you've got to remove so many particles from your raw water before it's delivered out into a potable water distribution system. It deals with acute health issues, infection or sickness, illness from a pathogen, a virus, Giardia, Cryptosporidium. It's very focused, and it's a multi-barrier approach. It includes sedimentation, filtration, and the use of chlorine for disinfection on the back end of the treatment. That rule is in direct conflict with the disinfection and disinfection byproduct rule, which is a rule that addresses chronic health impacts, specifically carcinogens in water that are created with chlorine. So it's a balancing act in treatment, using chlorine to achieve a safe water supply, but not overfeeding chlorine. Chlorine can be fed, it's in fact not the chlorine itself that's the problem, it's when chlorine combines with some of the organic compounds in water. So in our watersheds, we're pretty fortunate that we have very low organic compounds compared to larger watersheds out east that have to spend a lot of time and money planning for this type of treatment. But we do have regulations. The state's pretty conservative about that and reducing it, to extremely low levels. So we have compliance standards for organic carbon, and that comes through our watershed. When a leaf dissolves in the watershed, it puts out an organic compound, or anything out there that's living can potentially become, an organic compound we have to look at and remove potentially from the system. And then it looks at the formation of different compounds that we would be concerned with. So before everyone gets panicked about the risks of drinking treated water, I wanted to put this slide in because it makes a really good demonstration of what we've achieved in drinking water. In 1900, your lifespan, your life expectancy from birth was 47 years of age. In 1800, it was about 37 years of age. So over 100 years, it maybe changed about 10 years. The improvements from 1900 to 1950, where we went close to 70 years of age, are almost predominantly related to water treatment, improvements and advances in water treatment. Most of the improvements since that time have been improvements in healthcare. So it's been a tremendously successful industry with regards to public health. It has, issues and health concerns that we continue to manage today, but we manage them at a very, very high level compared to a lot of other industries. Future regulations, I only show this slide just to demonstrate there are a lot of them, and there's a lot of uncertainty as to where they're headed and when they'll be promulgated. So we keep our ear to the ground continually, and Cal Youngberg's group spends a lot of their time actually at the state monitoring and assessing and advising us back in the utility as to what is coming and what we need to do and what we need to build. So we have a good partnership with both Cal's group and Nick's group that designs and builds the improvements the regulations require. Customer complaint history. We've had a lot of good success with our potable water, and that we actually have fairly minimal complaints compared to a lot of other utility organizations. You can see that our high numbers are still fairly low, and most of them are related to taste and odor complaints, which come from algae. If you look here at these couple of peak years, this is related less to our water supply and more to our treatment facilities. When Nelson Flanders was built, we moved over to an entirely new way of treating for taste and odor compounds. And when we finally needed that equipment starting in 2008, the plant went online in 2006, and we didn't have much in our watershed that we had to treat for. We found the equipment didn't work very well. It worked for a few weeks and then started to present problems to us. So a lot of that had to be rebuilt. We also discovered that the bulk powdered activated carbon that we use for taste and odor removal really varied in quality, and it took us a while to really dial in the providers, the best providers of that material that work best for the types of organic compounds we have in our system. So, but it is something that's important to us. We're judged more by the aesthetic quality of our water, quite frankly, than the health quality, because it's very safe to drink. Some of the recommendations that we had through this master plan were to install mixing equipment in our forebay to reduce some of the taste and odor compounds. We did install these once again before the master plan was completed. We hopped on these right away, and it did help. A new challenge we have are algae that actually don't really present as much of a taste and odor problem, but do present a problem to our filtration process, and that they can plug filters prematurely, which causes cost and inefficiency in treatment. So we've spent some time trying to manage some of those issues and look for causes out in our watershed and for potential sources that we can manage out there as well. Major capital projects, obviously, is we talked about the expansion of Nelson Flanders, adding some redundancy to that facility. The two combined were still cheaper than rebuilding Wade Gaddis, and then the cost to decommission Wade Gaddis, at least to some degree in the future. Potable water distribution, drivers here, obviously aging infrastructure, the same thing that drives the other two. Major system expansions to meet growth in Longmont in the 60s and 80s out in the distribution system are now coming due for renewal, and certainly anything before that. Future capacity, same thing, trying to read that crystal ball and project what we need in the future and how to build it so we don't build it too fast, but just in time. And then dealing with risk factors through modeling to look at different scenarios like loss of supply in certain areas, or a fire, high demands, or a large leak. We use pretty solid, sophisticated models to isolate parts of the system and look at potential scenarios we may face, and then look at working through what available supply we need, all the way through what we produce, the capacity we have out in the system. That red box shows maybe a future capacity that could be supplied by other jurisdictions we interconnect with, and our stored water, and run various scenarios to come up with how to develop that system both near term and long term. We also analyze our break history in the system to ensure that we are renewing assets frequently enough. So this, the standard for breaks are about 15 breaks per 100 miles per year. It's not a regulatory standard, it's an industry standard. You can look in this middle column at our breaks per 100 miles per year. We had around the turn of this most recent century, it peaked up into some numbers around 11 to 10 breaks per 100 miles. You see we've come down a fair amount since that time. If you look at just our pipe that was built before 1981 and the break history on that pipe, you can see it's quite a bit higher. So that's going to be our focus area in the coming years. We're trying to reduce breaks in frequency by renewing that infrastructure.
Quick question, how does our number of breaks per mile equate to what Denver's breaks per mile? I mean, they have got a lot more breaks, but they had like 276.
Yeah, I didn't have all of their data,
okay,
Mayor Coons, but they did report in their news article that it was about 7 to 10 breaks per 100 miles over their last 2 years. They also went on to say it was extremely variable,
okay,
and not something they could easily project.
Thank you.
Ours, as you can see, are fairly dialed in now and consistent around that 6 to 7 range. Major projects, tank replacements, in particular, Price Park and the Montgomery tank that's close to the Nelson Flanders plant, and then the potential to add one storage tank. Transmission line expansions, looking out into the future here, near future and long term, and then distribution system rehab, which has really been an ongoing project, something that we fund some of every year. And those plans really tend to ebb and flow based on our analysis of what's failing in the system We don't have, once again, perfect knowledge of what is going to fail. We have some question marks here, just like everyone does with great infrastructure. As Dale keeps pointing out, we've developed the system with a lot of PVC pipe, and there's not really a lot of history as to how that pipe may fail in the future. Harold, you may have some experience with that in your past, but that's a bit of a question mark, and we're all going to be on that learning curve to see what happens here, and hopefully it's a slow progression and something we can respond to fairly systematically. Most of those projects, are pretty spread across the city, tend to be a little bit more north where we're seeing more development. This map could change with time, most certainly. That's the flexibility of a master plan. So near-term projects, we're looking, and these are things we're going to have to address with near-term revenue plans. Windy Gap firming in that $19 million range. There's some flexibility, obviously, to that number as we still continue to plan and dial in. Nelson Flanders expansion estimated right now at about $23 million. The Price Park tank replacement and Clover Basin transmission lines, smaller projects, but still, will drive our future revenue requirements. If you look at the entire plan that we have mapped out right now, and keep in mind, this is not in stone, because as you get further out, it can't be in stone. But between now and 2033, we're going to probably spend somewhere around $200 million on our water utility. About $50 million in raw water, a little over $60 in water. And predictably, our distribution system, which will have a lot of renewal requirements, will be the bigger chunk of that at 102. If you divide those numbers up into these categories, the future demand, and I should say future demand at $77 million also includes really some current demand, because some of that includes renewing that capacity at Wade Gaddis that we are going to lose.
Councilmember Bradley, do you have a question?
I just one quick question that's going to be on my mind and I won't be thinking. So you don't need to go into this now. Just very briefly, that $215 million, is it in the future capital improvement budgets? Is that something that we're also going to have to bond out for? Okay. Okay. The answer is yes. Okay. So I was just curious. Thank you.
Mayor and Council, we will address that a little bit here in a couple slides too. I think Dale's going to take on those topics a little bit. So, asset renewal is the big chunk here at $114 million. Risk reduction and then flood recovery costs are in there as well. So looking at some of the policy issues, the issues that will be of your concern as we move forward here in the water utility, obviously the continued recovery from the flood and decisions that are still yet to be made there. Financial strategies, $215 million in the next 20 years is a fair amount of revenue we'll need to generate, and we are not currently, our code does not currently include rates that would pay for all those costs, so we'll have to look at that. System development fees as well as rates, I think the whole revenue side will need to be addressed. Cost allocations, as we, I think in our next comprehensive planning effort, maybe get also a better picture of this mix of residential and commercial. We'll really have to look at that cost allocation a little bit more. And frankly, even before that, those changes to the comp plan. Rate stabilization, this is a big issue in the industry now with conservation, really, we talk about drought and wet years, but what's happened is that we are finding ways to deliver infrastructure when it's needed, not too far ahead and not too late. But what that requires is a lot of flexibility, and sometimes that flexibility means stabilizing your rates through maybe base charges or base fees, which are getting to be more popular in the industry. Obviously, the flexibility to meet future demands I've mentioned numerous times. There will be a lot of work yet to verify what it is we need and when we're going to need it, even though we have a good picture now of what we think the near term brings. Continue to work on our competitive approaches, particularly efficiencies, so we're delivering greatest value to our community. Obviously in our day-to-day operations, our goal is to reduce the cost so that we provide reliable water and we can shift more of those revenues we do receive into capital projects to keep that, a sterling utility. And then, risk mitigation through resiliency, redundancy, and I didn't mention here, but planning, vulnerability assessments, different risk assessments that we have to engage in order to ensure that our utility is ready to meet a wide range of outcomes, many of which we hope will never occur. And at that point, I'd like to kind of turn it over to Dale to talk a little bit about next steps.
Mayor Combs and members of council, I'm Dale Rademacher, Director of Public Works and Natural Resources. So Bob has given you quite a bit of information, and it's probably a lot to try to absorb. Suffice it to say, the executive summary that we put in your packet is a much reduced version of the entire report. And of course, if the council would like the entire report, we'll be more than happy to send that to you. A couple of just overview kind of things. Documents like master plans and these types of efforts are very important to educate and train not only our current staff, but our future staff as they come into the organization. It's one of the best tools that I think we have to pass along the institutional knowledge that we know about this system, so that those coming after us have a good start. They understand how, the basic issue, how the heck did we get to where we are now? And so they may curse us for it, but they'll at least understand how we got there. Our system is very sound, and I think that is evidenced through how we got through the flood last year. If you'll remember, we sustained the major damage to our raw water system, but we still had one. We still had one transmission line serving the city. We never lost water service in our city. We never had a boil order in our city. And I think that's really a testament to a sound system that is really sort of the legacy of our community that I think our customers have come to expect from us. Almost to take it for granted, which is actually okay. But it can also, as this story out of the Rotarian sort of notes, if you take things for granted too much, you tend to forget, frankly, what it takes for that to be at your house every day. Our goal through planning efforts like this is to maintain that level of resiliency and that level of quality for our customers into the future. We think that is our responsibility. We think that that's our duty to try to do to the best of our ability, obviously in the most financially responsible manner. So, in other words, as Bob said several times, don't build something if you don't need it. Don't build it prematurely. Build it as close to the time that you need it, so that it's fully utilized, and then fully utilize that system to the best that you can. He sort of went over quickly our competitiveness side of things. Since 2000, since we've been working on our strategic plan, we continue to do that. Our annual cumulative savings over that time period now are over $20 million. That $20 million are dollars that this utility has to invest back into its infrastructure. And I think that's again, something our customers expect us to do, we ought to be doing, and we ought to continue to do and continue to try to be more competitive. So, the big question of what's next? Well, the obvious question, what's next is, so $215 million. How do we start to pay for that? Not how do we pay for the whole $215 million, because that's over the next 20 years. But we need to figure out over the next 5 to 10 years how we're going to get there. And so, concurrent with this effort, and it's in its final stages, is an update to our rates and fees. I know council loves to hear that. I'm looking at council member Finley, and she's already shaking her head. Heck no. But again, we need to do that in order to understand what does it take in order to continue to have the system that we believe we want in our community. And so we are looking at both the rate and the fee side of the equation, and hope to come and talk with you about that in October. We also hope to do that in a pre-session kind of format where we can really sort of get down into it and have a real good discussion on some of the alternatives that we're going to bring forward for you to consider. I think the challenge whenever you're staff, you never want to come forward. I sort of pledged when I probably should have never. It's like making a campaign pledge. Should have never done that. I pledged early on I would never have a rate increase. And that was probably not smart. If I look back on that, probably shouldn't try to do that. We did make it a long time. We made it a long, long time before we had any sort of significant rate increases because we were cutting staff and we were cutting costs and we were doing everything we could. Well, we have played that game out. We are staffed at levels lower than we were when I started working here in the mid-1980s. We have less people working in utilities now than we did then for a city that is more than twice the size of the city that we had then. I don't think that's too shabby. I think we've done a pretty good job there. I also think we have some really good infrastructure. We have an excellent water supply. We have an excellent treatment plant. We have really good storage systems. And they're all aging. They're all things that we got to keep up on. It's no different than your house. Your house is in great shape today. At least I hope everybody's is. But you know you got to replace the roof. You know you got to replace the heater. You know you got to replace those things. And that's what capital plans and master plans allow us to do. So I won't bore you anymore. We have staff here. I think Nick is still here. So if you have engineering questions, and Larry Ueno's here, we can respond to those. We do want to make sure that you have a chance to hit us with those questions that you might have about this particular plan.
I did have a question on, when you take a plant that's basically designed to be a 30 MGD plant, and now we're running it at 40, we beefed it up or supercharged it or whatever. When you run something harder like that, is it kind of like when, Brian driving a car and we driving the same car, is that car going to wear out a lot faster because he's going to drive it harder than what I'm going to do?
So Mayor, I don't know if that's an accurate analogy because I don't know how you two drive. Let's assume that you're both driving within the limits of the law, which is how we're running the treatment plant. The treatment plant is within the limits of what the Department of Health allows us to. They are the ones that re-rated the plant and allowed us to re-rate. And so even though we re-rated to a greater capacity, I don't want to leave the impression that we re-rated to any sort of level that reduces the quality or reduces the reliability of the plant. I think what Bob was saying is like a car, however. If you run it at 70 mile an hour every day as opposed to 50, your systems are likely to wear out a little sooner. I think those are things that you look at and you plan for. The other reality is we're not running that plant at 40 MGD day in and day out. The way peaks work in the system is you will come up to that peak of 32, which is currently where we are, for maybe a few days out of the year. And then you're running more at a base level, say at the mid-20s, mid to high 20s, okay? And so just because you can rev the car up to 70 miles an hour, think of it as like a passing thing. You're going to 70 or 80 or whatever to get around that guy, but you're not racing at 70. I'm looking at Mayor Pro Tem Bagley. Maybe that's not a good analogy. Yeah, exactly. So I don't know if that helps you answer, but it does have the potential to wear facilities quicker than you otherwise would.
Well, my other question on peak water demand, I assume it's not like, electricity, you have your peak demand occurs at like 5 o'clock, when everybody's got their, but peak water is probably different. It probably is a lot leveler, and it's like over days instead of hours kind of thing, right?
It doesn't peak as rapidly as the electric system, but it follows a similar pattern. I guess the interesting thing that's happened over the last 20 to 30 years is that we used to have our peaks on a weekend or a Sunday where people were watering the heck out of their lawn because they had to manually water, right? You had to drag your hose around and you had to be there to do it. So those Sunday evenings used to be the peaks, like around 6 to 7 to 8. And then it would drop off. Well, that's really turned on its head now because most of us have automatic systems. I think we're actually hitting as high a peak during the night as we are during the day. And so the water systems actually balanced out a little better that way because of those systems.
Okay. Councilmember Santos.
In fact, if I'm not mistaken, since we've been on voluntary water restrictions, our water usage has gone down the last several years. One, because of that, and plus of irrigation systems. I guess the question I have regarding the Nelson Flanders plant, what is the maximum that we can go to MGD?
At that site?
Yeah.
By
if
permit?
we needed to.
So,
and the reason I ask, because during the flood, we did have Left Hand Water District did tap into Longmont, and I can't remember who else. But that was it. But if we needed to, if the Tri-Cities needed to come on, I mean, there was talk of that at one point. But if we needed to, there was another catastrophe, another arrangements that we had with other districts or cities or municipalities. What is, if we were to build the 23 million Nelson Planters, what is the peak, or what could we build out to handle that?
So I'll answer that in a couple of different ways, Councilmember Santos. I'll start first on when we built the plant and permitted it through Boulder County 1041. It was one of the largest 1041 permits that we went through. The site is actually permitted to go up to 80 MGD. Okay, we built phase 1 and many of the phase 1 facilities, and I think that includes the effluent line going out of the plant, some of the lines coming into the plant at 60 MGD. And the first phase of the plant that you see up there today will treat upwards of 30, was what it was originally designed. We've now re-rated to 40, okay? And it is designed to double, to mirror that by expanding to the east. And so theoretically, you could take the plant up to 60 with some of the transmission lines in and out of the facility. Technically, you could take it up as high as 80 under our permit.
Okay. So that was basically my big question in case something were, again, catastrophic. If we were to expand, I mean, I'm assuming we would, whether it's this council or future councils down the line in a phased manner. I'm comfortable with, how the past councils have done very well and councils that I've served on have kept our water portfolio very well stocked. Because I heard a interesting forecast from Mr. Tom Clark about how the almost a 500,000 acre-feet shortage on the Front Range going from here to the future. I'm not so concerned about the city of Longmont. So anyway, and looking at the graph that's in the packet, seeing all the dollars regarding Wade Gaddis, total, how much are we talking about to decommission Wade Gaddis?
Let me look at that real quick. Maybe you know.
Because on table ES7, I mean, it's all broken down, but
We could, in effect, choose not to decommission. I mean, actually put much work into decommission it and let it sit. So that number ranges almost from probably, the basic work you would have to do up to, I think we have $5 million to fully decommission the facility.
Or we could just basically just do a small decommission and kind of leave it like the other two plant, or less, the plant and a half that we have now.
We could take the route. Again, I guess we'll sort of cross that bridge when we get there. Mm-hmm. $5.5 million is quite a bit of money to do that. So what we've done on the north and south plants is we're trying to sell them in their as-is condition. Now, whether we'll find a buyer for the Wade Gaddis site in the as-is condition might be more problematic. Sure. But we have been able to at least have some serious inquiries on the other two plants. Again, without the city expending the dollars necessarily to fully decommission.
Well, the north plant, still has a little bit. The south plant, we had a little help with. Yeah, thanks.
Councilmember Moore.
Thank you, Mayor Crooms. Just first question is kind of a engineering nerdy question. What's the efficiency of the Nelson Flanders plant? Like, how many gallons do you put in to get a gallon? How many gallons does it take to make a gallon?
Mayor and council, so I don't have that calculation in my head, but it costs us the production of 32 million gallons to produce 30 million gallons out in the potable water system.
Okay, thank you.
Pretty efficient.
And you mentioned that there were $17 million still in flood recovery needs. Is any of that reimbursable from FEMA?
The bulk of that would be reimbursable. And that's work that's underway up in the reservoir area. So and a lot of that's already underway. So yes, it is FEMA reimbursable.
And my last question is about assessing the condition of our existing older infrastructure, I guess you'd say, your water delivery systems. Are there any technologies out there that can assess the condition of the pipes, like some acoustic monitoring or ultrasonic testing of the pipelines as they relate to, either wall thickness or listening for leaks or those type of things? And if there aren't, if we don't know, we probably could look at that?
Yeah, Larry Whale, Engineering Services. There are several different techniques that can be used on large diameter pipes. Smaller diameter pipes, we can probably do that. There are acoustic methods. There are electromagnetic technologies that can actually determine thickness of wall pipe. And those things have been used on some of our pipelines, and depending on the condition and where they're located, we would select the appropriate technology for those.
So you actually are using those non-destructive evaluation? Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Councilmember Levison.
I have just a couple of points. So can you explain what the total organic carbon spectrum is? Because we did hear recently of a city in Ohio that actually had to shut down their water system due to algae growth in Lake Michigan. And so is it just algae, or what's the broad spectrum of what's defined as TOC?
Mayor and Council, the total organic carbon is inclusive of really any source of organically available carbon. So obviously that wouldn't be carbon in a diamond, but
Why not?
yeah.
You just have diamonds flowing through.
Not biologically available.
Oh,
but,
okay.
so it's
Dissolvable
broad,
carbon. It's got to be a dissolvable
that's
carbon
right.
then.
And when we talk about total, we do talk about the particulate fraction as well. But we're more concerned about the dissolved fraction in water treatment and in the formation of, different compounds that might be of concern for cancers.
Okay. So, but it's distinct from those other compounds that are coming up as the new ones that we're tracking.
I suppose you could throw those in the bag, but those are very smaller amounts, and the concern there, they wouldn't really contribute much to the volume of organic matter. The greater concern there is the formulation of those potential endocrine disruptors that could interact, with human functions.
And then I have the flip question from Councilmember Santos. He wanted to know the capacity of Nelson Flanders. My question is, do we have enough redundancy if Nelson Flanders is wiped out? Could we, I know we talked about, Dale and I a bit this afternoon on the phone about, partnerships and stuff, but could we have Wade Gaddis out there as some kind of minimal lifeline in case something wipes out Nelson Flanders?
Mayor and Council, the answer to that question is absolutely yes. Today, Wade Gaddis could supply, even in the summer with restrictions on watering, could, I think, fairly comfortably supply our basic demand, basic needs. The concern there is that every month and year that goes by, that's less true because of the age of that facility.
Well, I guess that my question really is that we've seen the city has been very good about redundancies, and that's saved our what's over many occasions. And when you talk about building the right amount of capacity and excess capacity at the right time, you have to still factor in that redundancy. So in my viewpoint, having that excess capacity maybe a little bit before you actually need to access it is sometimes a very wise thing to do, because you have to weigh those risk factors, and I understand the way all that flow works and what you've outlined in the plan. However, the reputation of the city of Longmont from the flood and every kind of service delivery we have is so stellar that it would be an unexpected catastrophe, really, if we had a crisis that we could not meet, because we're not, we don't have that reputation among across almost every bit of service delivery we do. So my concern and support is that we do have that redundancy. We do have some overcapacity of the system just to protect ourselves, because with the outline of the possibility of wildfire and looking at what the carbon, the indicators of what it could do to the water supply higher up in that region where we know we have risk of wildfire, that's really a concern. And we've seen what's happened in California the last couple of days. Their watershed in those areas that are burning is just destroyed. And, it's going to be a concern in the future.
Councilmember Bagley.
Thank you, Mayor Coombs. I guess the thoughts I'm having as we get into October, I might as well say them now because I'll probably be having them then. So I'm sitting here thinking we raised the utility rates for our parks maintenance. And so I can imagine we might need this, but I can still see that, citizens of Longmont might not be too happy to get their utility rates raised and then their water rates raised. So that's the first thought I had. Oh crap! They're pretty funny, by the way. So then I guess my next question is, which pot is this money coming from? We've got all the little silos. It's not the general fund, correct?
Water fund.
It's the water fund. Okay.
Right.
So things like when we're dealing, I'm just thinking over the last year, affordable housing, parks, that's completely different, right?
Different fund.
Different fund. Okay. So as I'm hearing you say that in October of 2014 that you're going to come back and give us financing options to consider, I guess I would appreciate, there's the ways that cities usually raise money is through fees, taxes, and rates. But I'm curious to know if it would make a difference if we were creative. I know that Councilmember Moore, for example, is adamant that we shouldn't sell to the oil and gas companies our water. But are there other ways, or even that? I want to explore. This is an asset. We have plenty of it. Is it possible to sell some of it? Is there a market for it? You already mentioned that the Wade Gaddis plant probably is worth nothing. But anything we can think of to do anything other than raise the rates or our fees, I think would be politically appreciated by us and, financially appreciated by the people of Longmont.
So, Mayor Combs and Mayor Pro Tem Bagley, we can certainly bring back that for a sort of a discussion so you can see those in the context of the overall revenue stream. Over the years, we have evaluated any number of different scenarios on regional supply theories, those types of things. What it really comes down to is finding a partner that needs your service and wants to do that. Whether we sell to the oil and gas industry or not, I don't think is going to remove the fundamental issue of our basic rate structure. I'd like to think it could, but I don't think that's out there.
They don't want $215 million.
Exactly. There's not enough people out there to shift all that bill to them, right? So as much as and I'd like to share, I have that same concern. If anything, the staff probably thinks I'm way too frugal, and that I tend to cut things more rapidly than I tend to fund things. And so suffice it to say, I'm not far from your concern of, I think of all the folks in Longmont that are frankly struggling to just make their day-to-day payments. And that's a hard issue. And that's one of the alternatives I think we want to talk with you about is the whole concept of lifeline rates and how do we deal with the folks that are least able to pay. You can also, and again, I'm sort of talking about stuff we're going to talk about in October, but there's other rate strategies that you can also deal with, issues of what your rate structure looks like through a drought, what your rate structure should do for to discourage high use. I'll put it that way. So those are all things that council, you guys will have choices on and give us direction on, sort of philosophically how you look at things. My guess is we're going to come up with a pretty, I'd like to say it's creative, but a sound approach that will derive the revenues that we need in order to sustain the system.
So, and if I can jump in real quick, I think something that Dale said earlier is really important. And whatever you design, you also have to be cognizant of the fact that the environmental impacts that you get from a really wet season, or you're in a drought and you're restricting usage, also has an impact on the revenues that you're generating within your fund. And so those are all things that are going to be talked about, because what you want to do is you want to balance that out over time, so you're not pushing up too hard all at once, or you kind of want to find the sweet spot in that calculation, which typically brings in a number of variables and a number of approaches. The one thing I also wanted to say, based on your first comment, I think we all agree with the whole concept of rates. The reality of this, though, is that it will hit at some point in time. It's either going to hit now or it's going to hit down the road, and you don't want to be down the road on that. I've had the unfortunate experience of being down the road, and it's not a place you want to be in. The key is how do you balance it out over time? Because if you wait too long, then all of a sudden you start seeing exponential increases in the cost of what you're trying to do, because you waited too long and there's not other opportunities for you to manage that system. And so that's why I really like this long-term view that you're bringing in, because I think it really allows you to manage it in a more realistic way, and it allows you to make some decisions as you're moving forward versus being pressed 20 years down the road where you have no choices.
And I thank you, first of all. I guess I would feel comfortable just thinking of it as, I would encourage staff to bring all revenue options, financing, taxes, creative rate structures, anything and everything you can think of to, if we have to increase rates, okay, but it'd be really nice to do knowing that we've really explored each and every option.
And absolutely one thing we should do, both in talking with the council and with our customers, is to explain how we are deriving revenue from things like our excess water that we try to lease and rent every year, and those long-term agreements that we enter into, and the value that we get out of it. Because we in fact are deriving some pretty hefty revenues out of water that the citizens do not need today, and we do not believe will need for the next several years. And so we are trying to manage it that way. We're trying to over leverage, because nobody's going to like you when you have to say you have to cut back because we overextended ourselves somewhere else. And so I think first and foremost our focus is internal to our city and to our customers, and then to try to leverage whatever portion of our system that we can, that we think clearly benefits our city. Because that's also what your charter says, is that to take water, first of all, we can't sell water. We cannot sell the water right without a vote of the people, according to our charter. And we also, when it comes to service outside of our city, our charter also says that that has to clearly benefit the citizens. So we have to be able to demonstrate how that clearly benefits, which we can do. You can clearly benefit by keeping your rates down. Exactly. So, but that's embedded in your charter, and I think it's actually a good aspect of the charter.
Councilmember Santos?
Thank you, Mayor Coombs. Well, I'm assuming when you come back in October, you'll show the what we deliver to the City of Lyons, and I'm not aware of how their system is going, or I know we deliver to Lyons, and wherever we deliver to hygiene,
correct,
and whatever percentage or amount of dollars that brings to the City of Longmont. No one likes to raise rates or anything like that. And, we had this conversation when council first instituted the parks fee. it got so, in that case, things got so far behind that, we were trying to, and we're still trying to catch up. This is, and also kind of like with the wastewater treatment plant, we're trying to stay ahead. So whether it's raising rates or trying to sell anything really quickly, it's going to be a tiered process. So I'm sure staff will bring us back a very wide, broad options.
And the reality is, it may be a combination of multiple approaches. Actually,
It will be.
it will be a
It has
combination
to
of
be.
multiple
We were
approaches.
talking, 20 years?
Absolutely.
It has to be.
In 2014, I doubt any of us in this room know exactly what all of those alternatives could be, but more than happy to talk with you about potential and what that potential could be down the road, whether it's this council or future councils, and what you might want to just keep in your back pocket, so to speak, and know that that's out there.
Beer from every faucet.
I don't really have a question. I just like to make a couple of comments. One, I think it's really excellent that you are looking out into the future and trying to predict the future 5, 7, 15 years from now, because that's a really difficult thing to do. But, it's obviously, you can't wait until 10 years from now and decide, gee, we need another water plant, because that's too late. So I applaud you for looking into the future. A hypothetical question. Let's say you're building a sim city from scratch. Would the ideal city have like a separate water source for raw water for irrigating the outside and potable water for the inside? Or is that ever done in any communities? I was just curious.
It's absolutely done in communities. I'm not a Sim City guy, so I can't really respond to it in that way, but I can tell you that it is done, and it's actually done in some of the communities, even here in Colorado, where communities build a potable water system, and they have the infamous purple system that is their raw water irrigation systems or their pump back systems. My perspective on that is twofold. One is you typically find that happening in communities that are water short, and so they're doing it in order to stretch their supplies to the best of their ability to meet their customers. Because essentially what you're doing is you're duplicating your systems out in the streets. So instead of one pipe going down that road, now you got two. And so you're making choices on infrastructure that you're going to ultimately, guess what, be maintaining and replacing. And so, or it could also be communities that have water supplies that they can't deliver to their treatment facilities, but they can deliver to their yards or to their parks. We do a lot of that in Longmont. We don't have a separate pipe, but we use the extensive irrigation ditch system that the people before us built. We use those ditches to deliver to our golf courses and to many of our parks. Our goal is to irrigate everything we can in the city, as far as the city facility, with raw water. And so we do that, though, without that separate purple pipe that I think over time will prove to be expensive.
Okay. Councilman Robinson.
So I would like to remind council of the challenge and danger if you don't pay attention to the system. I mean, I was visiting Alabama the year that the indictments came down and people went to prison for, wastewater and pretreatment and different water districts where they never wanted to raise their rates at all. And in fact, they never did raise their rates. And when the chickens came home to roost, so to speak, their rates increased 400% because basically they had to rebuild the entire system. Not only did heads roll, but there were long-term property owners that basically couldn't do anything with their property because of the costs associated with redoing the system that delivered potable water to them and carried away the waste. So the downside of being afraid to raise rates, I think, is very serious. the other part of it is that we're always going to get towards a tipping point on what is perceived to be too much. We're not in this alone. Every city of any age in Colorado is facing the same thing. And so to think maybe that we would be less competitive in our region with rates that accommodate planned growth and also rehabilitation of our system is would be a false assumption. And we can't ignore it. I know this is one of those coming crises of infrastructure. It's not just roads anymore. It's natural gas pipelines that are blowing up in the older cities in the east. It's everything that's underground. And people may not see a nice shiny new bridge because when we do those pipes, they're going to see the hole in the ground and having things fixed, but they're not going to know that we've gotten a system that's going to last a while more.
I have a question about pipes. Two questions. First, on your presentation, you talked about replacing all the pipes from the 60s and 70s. Why was that? They were faulty?
A couple of things, Councilmember Christensen. You know, and I actually explained this, I think, to Councilmember Moore. The pipes that were installed, say, at the turn of the century, were cast iron, incredibly thick-walled, because they didn't have us brilliant engineers to tell them how thin they could make that wall. So here we come now into the 60s and the 70s, and the engineers come forward and say, hey, we can save you money, because we can design a thinner-walled pipe called ductile iron pipe that will be less expensive and trust us, really good. And I'm not ripping on the ductile iron pipe industry, but the truth of the matter is it is deteriorating quicker than we probably thought and hoped it would. But you know, when we say the 60s to the 80s, that's the time the city expanded very rapidly.
I see.
And a lot of the pipe went in the ground very rapidly, potentially without as much oversight and diligence as it went in. And so we are seeing the need to replace that maybe sooner than we would like to, although over this 20-year time period that we're looking at, if you go from 1960 out 10, 20 years from now, it's not that bad. You're in that 50 to 60-year time frame. What we're saying is we know it's a much bigger percentage of the total pipe system than what we had before that.
And so do you foresee that, have you had any problems with PVC piping?
That was the
That's
the
what
issue,
scares me. That's
the issue that Bob was mentioning. You know, we haven't seen a lot of breaks in it, but it's still a fairly new pipe. It sort of came into the forefront in the 1980s, and it is now by far the bulk of the pipe systems that are going in. I think the portions of PVC to watch are going to be how it holds up. Does it become more brittle as it ages, and is it able to withstand soil movements? And then do the gaskets hold? Those to me will be the two areas that, and I'm hoping it doesn't happen, but if there's going to be concerns with it, I would guess it's going to be there.
Okay. The other question I had is, and this may be just kind of naive because I'm a chronic do-it-yourselfer, but when my sewer, which was an old ceramic plate
clay line,
gave out, I was sold on this deal of the blowing out a fiber that was then coated with stuff. And I'm wondering if, and I'm hoping that this actually is very good and holds up for the duration of my life, but I was, because it costs, but I'm just thinking that I know it's possible to check for leaks underground, and it's better to replace the whole pipe, but in a pinch, in an emergency, would that be a possibility for water pipes, even though they're not the same as sewage pipes? Of course, it's a smaller system. It's a,
So we do use what we call in situ pipelining on sewer lines
Right.
and a little bit on storm sewer. We don't use that particular technology. It's not approved yet for potable water.
Okay.
There are linings that you can install within an existing water line. You can either install a flexible plastic liner into it. They're not necessarily the cheapest way to go, and you would really do that if you're in a congested area, like if you were Denver and you were trying to put the line down 17th Avenue. You might say, hey, let's not tear that up.
Yeah.
Or you're in Manhattan and you don't want to, so I think it has its uses. I'm not sure that it's widespread in the layout of our city.
And it's not that cost effective really for.
Not necessarily. It's not necessarily the
for a
cheapest way.
large system. It's better to replace the pipe. Okay, thank you.
Okay, I think we're done. We don't have any more questions, so thank you very much.
We'll be back in October with the rest of the story, as they say.
Okay. Why don't we take like 5 minutes to stretch our legs?
also have broadband expenses, large capital expenses included compared to none in the 2014 adopted budget. Other CIP projects are shown in the Park Improvement Fund for a Park CIP project, Open Space and Conservation Trust Fund for another Park CIP project. And then we also have debt service increases in the Storm Drainage Fund. So all those are probably the larger larger percentage increases on that attachment B. But if you have specific questions on any of those, I could cover those. Moving on, though, sales and use tax is usually the probably most important revenue source that drives our at least our general fund, as well as 4 other operating funds in the budget, as far as what our revenues will be anticipated for a given year to help us to put together our budgets each year. So we do go through this process. I've covered it in brief for you already. I just wanted to give you a little bit of detail. I have updated data through July, which is sent out to the council yesterday, the increase for the year through July is 10.7%. It's holding pretty steady. Use tax is starting to drop. It's just a small concern, but I think we will see that maybe accelerate a little bit as we move further on because of delinquent use tax last year, and also sales tax. I also anticipate that will drop because Lucky's has had a full year of operation, and so we lose that as new revenue. And then, of course, stores at the mall being closed also are showing as decreases throughout the year. So what we did project to end 2014 with is a 4.99% increase, and there's the breakdown up there between sales and use tax. So we still think use tax will hold at least about over 12% for the year. So we projected for 2015 some conservative increases, a combined increase of 3.16%, and that's really what is basing most of our ongoing revenues in the 2015 budget for. But the growth in 14, in addition to this small increase for 15, is really what's making a large impact on these 5 funds as far as their ongoing revenues. Difference between 2015's budget and the 2014 proposed budget.
Councilmember Levinson, do you have a question?
Yes, just a quick question. Jim, when you've done some brief assessments around the zeroing out of the mall revenue, you also talked to us about the cannibalization factor of the mall. So will we be able to gauge once Sports Authority closes, we'll lose that sales tax revenue because then when it moves over to the mall, it becomes part of the TIF revenue. So is there a way that we're going to look at that sales tax revenue and perhaps a decrease at the end of 2015 and 2016 and look at what cannibalization factors play into that?
Well, Mayor Cruz, members of council, first I'll point out that in 2015 there's no mall estimates built in here at all. So if the mall opens up on schedule and has a quarter or less of activity, that's going to be revenue we don't have anticipated here, which will be a plus for us. So we didn't think it would be worth taking the risk of putting that in there. Cannibalization is going to be hard to measure. It might be easy to measure for something like Sports Authority because it's clear, although as you know, each individual business, their sales tax information is confidential, so it's hard for me to come back and say X amount of this is from Sports Authority. But beyond Sports Authority, when you're talking about restaurants, when you're talking about grocery stores, and maybe how much sales at Sam's might be now taking place at other discount stores in town, it's impossible to measure. It's all just going to be our best guess. So we can look at what's happening in the existing base of sales tax, and we can try to get a sense of what might be driving it, but we don't know for sure how much of that is really going to the Village of the Peaks versus maybe going somewhere else, or what may be the case. But we'll do our best to try to monitor that. So we will take that into consideration in the next year because, well, we do have a certain amount of base sales tax increase that we will receive back before the increment takes place. So that will be built for sure into the 2016 budget. But then beyond that, we're going to begin to have to take into consideration first how much of the sales tax for the 2 funds, the general fund and the public improvement fund, will go towards the repayment of the COP, and then beyond that would be surplus that would go into those 2 funds, and we'll have to be conservative about that until we begin to see what actual cannibalization sense at least we get as to what takes place.
Councilmember Levinson?
Thank you, Mayor. So, but don't we have some past data points that we could use to extrapolate? For example, we could look at what our grocery store revenue did, for example, in the first 6 months Sprouts was open. And then the first 6 months Lucky's was open. The first 6 months that they expanded Vitamin Cottage. I mean, we can do that internally, and that's what I'm really suggesting, to see, characteristically, you get this much of a bump that everybody runs to the new store. And then we want to look at what the new normal is after the new stores open and see if our capacity to, maybe we're going to capture capacity that was going and revenue that was being lost to the outside of the city. And we should be able to gauge some of that internally to take a look at those data points and extrapolate then what the cannibalization is. Because I think it is important to understand that, because, I mean, from other areas of the country, they have clearly shown there's a certain percentage of cannibalization when you have a project of this scale and size, certainly. And we then have to look at what our revenues would be for the 16 budget based on some data that we can project. I know you're very conservative about things, but I think that we want to maximize the amount of money we can spend every year on the revenue we know we're going to have, with not much left over. And I know your crystal ball is really well polished, but we also have to have the reality that we have to be able to accommodate something that's unknown at this point, but we can do our best guess.
Coombs, yes, we'll do our best guess. I think that it's there's no clear formula for this. You can look at what happened in any other entity, and no two entities would be the same. It really depends on what your existing base is versus what is the new mix in the new within the tax increment district. We will do our best to track that and make estimates, and we will stay conservative because if we're not and we get burnt, we don't want to put the city in that position of having to, pull back. Better to instead be able to, deal with that surplus the next year than they have to pull back during an operating year. So.
Yeah, I can see your conservative numbers there when you go from 10.7 through actuals through July, and at the end only predicting 4.99. That means you're being pretty conservative on that second half of the year. So.
Right, and for the reasons that I mentioned, and plus we did this we did this almost 3 months ago now. So at that point we were only looking at 3 to 4 months, and we weren't so sure whether that would continue. So. Okay, then moving on, this is probably not as relevant to the overall revenue base, but it does come into play for some of our system development, community investment fees, I should say, and system development fees. And as well, we do make estimates, the planning division does, for how much our building permits will be. There is a certain amount of building permit revenue built into the general fund. But it's probably not as significant because of the fact that we now have financial policy that whatever amount of revenue that comes from more than 120 permits of houses is considered to be incremental development revenue. So we don't rely on that for regular operating type expenses. But we did provide this here just to show you the estimate. This is 2014's estimate and status to date. And, from a revenue standpoint, we're beating our revenue estimates for 2014 already. For building permit revenue, doing really well for use tax revenue. Our single-family home valuations and the multi-family valuations, it's really the valuation number that drives this more than these individual dwelling unit numbers, and those valuation numbers are very strong through the first 7 months of the year. So the estimates for 2015 on our next slide, there is they do estimate increase from 282 combined permits in 14 with the projection to 323 combined permits in 2015. So again, it does drive some of our estimating in our general fund revenue accounts for plan check fees and building permits. Property tax is an interesting revenue source. So I do need to probably explain the calendar to you all. So we do receive some preliminary assessed valuation information from the assessor's office from Boulder County. We also get information from Weld as well, but we rely on Boulder since it's the majority of the AV for the city. And they did give us an early indication of a potential decline in our valuations. We had been working with budgets for 2014 where we had over budgeted, so we were finding we weren't going to get as much revenue based on the assessed valuation from 14, or I should say for 13 that was generating 14 revenue. So we took what we projected as, I think, a 0.2 or 0.25% decrease in the assessed valuation, and budgeted a 1.1% decrease from our property tax revenues that we had in place for 2014, in the 2014 budget. That would have been a decline of $148,000. So the calendar, going back to the calendar, so the preliminary assessed valuation actually is issued by the county underneath the state law in the last week of August. That would be the week that we gave you guys this proposed budget 2 and 3 weeks ago tonight. So in fact, we didn't have that information available to us until then, and we have since gone through that and found that we actually do probably have, based on both counties' assessed value, preliminary assessed valuations, which can change and have changed in the past and have burned us in the past. So, but we have an extra $200,000 or more of property tax revenue that is not currently programmed into the 2015 proposed budget. What we propose to do is come back to you on the 30th, in 2 weeks from tonight, with some options to consider as to what could possibly be done with those dollars before we ask you for final direction on this budget, which would be the following week. I think it's the 7th of October. So, but good news, at least it hasn't go in the other direction. It's, but I do want to point out that, like I said, we've been burnt by this. We did get some preliminary assessed valuation data on the DDA, and it went down dramatically, and we questioned it, and it has errors in it. So we're trying to get that resolved. So, you know, I'm not going to run to the bank. I don't want to go out and spend this money too fast, but I'm feeling like this is going to be $200,000 that we probably can count on. So we're looking into it, though. Questions on that? No? Not without your permission, right? So the general fund issues in the past, we've talked about them. The two major issues over the past few years have been the allocation of the 2% sales and use tax and the ongoing type expenses with 1-year commitment. And as you know, we've been going through the budget reset effort and trying to resolve those, as well as some other different reset issues that were existing in the general fund. So, in this 2015 budget, we have been pushing to try to get that allocation of the sales and use tax to an 85% general fund, 15% public improvement fund split. It has been 88.3 for the general fund, 11.7 over the past 5 years or so. A difference of $1,053,000 in the 14 budget. We are now changing that allocation in this proposed budget for 15 to 87.7% and 12.3%. So that difference is now $934,000. With the growth in the sales tax base, it's about a $250,000 difference in on the amount of dollars based on that change in the split between the general fund and the public improvement fund. So what we're doing in the public improvement fund, again, every year we try to make up for that difference in sales tax by how much looking at how much fund balance the public improvement fund has from use tax from the previous year's operations. We have $439,000 programmed from excess use tax in 2014 for the public improvement fund, and then on top of that, from one-time expenses in the general fund, we have proposed to transfer $539,000 from the general fund, so that combined, those two more or less are in the neighborhood of replacing that $934,000. Allows the public improvement fund to continue to try to address the infrastructure projects that it needs to deal with from year to year. And we've hopefully made some headway on that on that allocation between the two. The ongoing type expenses, one-year commitment, were $296,000 in 14, and we do not have any of such type of expenses with a one-year commitment in this proposed budget. I'll get into that detail a little bit more in a few minutes. So the 2015 proposed budget for the general fund is $64.4 million almost, and it's that's for 2014, I should say. And 2015's proposed budget is almost $67 million, so a $2.6 million or so increase from 14 to 15. It's a 4% increase in that fund. Take you through a little bit of the breakdown of what's making up those changes between 14 and 15. We'll point out that attachment D in your communication tonight does actually detail, does summarize and categorize all of the differences between each of the ongoing revenues and expenses in the general fund, but I'll highlight some of those larger ones as I go through this differential. So what it's not just an increase of $2.6 million. We have reductions of $912,000 and then an increase of $3.49 million of ongoing expenses. Reductions in our base budget expenses for 2015. As you know, in our early this year, in our 2014 budget, we closed the city's print shop. That really has an impact on both the expense and revenue side of $220,000. We had economic development reorganization, eliminating a couple positions that reduced $287,000. We have temporary wages that are decreased in this proposed budget of $113,000, but we are using those dollars to offset new changes in positions, which we'll talk about here as well on the expense side. Other reductions are, you've heard about earlier, the elimination of the recreation after-school program, $86,000, and the elimination of the prevention intervention program for $97,000. And we also were able to reduce funding to our old hire fire and police pension plans of $100,000 since they are both reached a overfunded status. And then increases in our ongoing expenses. Ongoing level 1 expenses are expenses that we're going to incur, whether we find the money to pay for them or not. But so we're pretty much forced to fund those in each annual budget because we're already incurring the costs. They could be expenses that, in this case this year, a lot of overtime that we're incurring, and on top of that, in some cases, there are maintenance type costs that we can't avoid because of contracts or things like that, or increasing costs. Ongoing level 2 are somewhat increase in service levels or change in service levels. And then the ongoing from one-time items is when any of the capital one-time expenses that we make that have an ongoing impact along with them from year to year. So these are the three totals. I'm going to break down these level 1 and 2 a little bit to the some larger highlights. On the ongoing level 1, we have $380,000 of public safety overtime expense. So about half of the level 1 costs for the general fund for next year. So our public safety fund, our public safety department, I should say, within the general fund and also in our public safety fund, that has been struggling with overtime costs over the last few years for a number of different reasons, including things like injuries to an aging workforce. We also have retirements that are causing them to have to cover vacancies and things like that. We've had reorganizations in the fire department that have caused need for more overtime to cover line shifts and such. So overall, they have been struggling with their budgets the last few years. We need to at least boost their budgets across the different areas of public safety to at least by $380,000 in the general fund to cover costs that they are incurring already. On top of that, we've got needs for ammunition on an annual basis for police and bunker gear for fire, $65,000 combined. We have election costs that have increased on us of $38,000 from the county. We have engineering tech services that are being provided to the general fund by Public Works Natural Resources from non-general fund services of $64,000 that we need to incur or pick up those costs for. And then we will be having new costs from Dry Creek Park for maintenance and temp wages of $80,000. I've rounded some of these numbers, by the way. We have ongoing level 1 expenses for shrub bed restoration in parks and greenways of $20,000, turf restoration in parks for $20,000, and parks landscaping maintenance contract cost increases of $14,000, and the mosquito vector program control of $14,000. Level 2 expenses, we have temp wages in aquatics of $71,550. So those are bringing those positions up to market. We have mental health service contract that was previously one of the ongoing expenses with a 1-year commitment. That's $30,000. Multicultural action plan, again, another one of those expenses, $25,000. And wildlife management, a third of those same, again, type of expenses that were previously 1-year commitment. Those are $15,000. So beyond level 1, level 2 expenses, some other areas on that worksheet that are increased that we categorize separately. Collective bargaining pay increases for the general fund alone of $453,000. Step pay increases in public safety of $119,000. Other pay increases within the general fund for the rest of the employee base based on the pay recommendations you'll hear about in a few minutes from Bobby King is $700,000. And the other pay adjustments are temp wage pay adjustments of almost $33,000. We have $658,000 for new positions. There's 8 and a percentage, 8 point something at new FTE of positions in the general fund, some of which are about all but 3, I believe, are positions that exist currently as temp positions that we are now benefiting or making full-time. And then on top of that, we have workers' compensation cost increases of $96,000 and liability insurance of $41,000. Those are both the general fund shares. We have larger contributions to those funds overall based on all of the operating funds make contributions to those 2 insurance funds, which have been seen increasing costs in recent years, and we have been having to boost them to boost contributions to those funds to keep pace with those costs. We have a $60,000 increase in the LAEC contract, offset by the economic development reorganization savings I already talked about. We have $10,000 increase in the cable trust contract. They get a percentage of the cable franchise revenue, and that's the increase that is budgeted. And then $309,000 increase in fleet lease charges. And then finally, $41,000 and change for human service agency funding based on the percentage of total general fund operating revenue. So then decreases in ongoing revenue. We have I didn't even get to change this, right? So this is based on the proposed budget. And this is showing, as I mentioned, that we had built in $148,000 decrease in property tax. $10,000 decrease in cigarette tax, administrative transfer fees. As we refine them, they've gone down. It's gone down almost $11,000 this year. Fines and forfeits. We've been down quite a bit in court fines over the past couple of years, and it's probably due to a number of different reasons. Some of it has to do with police operations. Some of it could be just on the frequency of events in the city. And so what we've had to do is adjust this downward to make sure we're at least putting ourselves in a position where we're not coming up too short in our general fund revenues there. Is basically kind of being covered by our sales tax here. So we made an adjustment here and hoping that we can, the police are trying to be able, again, it gets back to their staffing issues, and so they're trying to devote more attention towards this to get back to the previous levels that they were at. So, you going to say something? Okay. Elsewhere, we've got the decline in print shop revenue I referred to already. Union Reservoir fees are down. We reduced our estimate by $30,000. The lease of real property is in anticipation if we were to sell the building that the cheese importers are in, which is the revenue from that, and then continue to see decreases in our investment earnings. And then from an ongoing revenue increase perspective, and most of this, again, is coming from our sales and use tax growth. Again, a lot of it is from the base growth from 2014, and then that 3% or so increase we budgeted for 15. We have some electric franchise revenue, ties back to their revenue estimates based on their rates. And then other franchise fee revenues are totaled in here of $156,000. The building permit revenue, $158,000, again, based on our building permit estimates, but most of that's incremental development revenue. Plan check fees as well. And then recreation fees, again, this is not an increase in actual cost of recreation programs. This is actual increase in the amount of revenue that's being generated by these programs today. So we're recognizing the revenue that we're bringing in and budgeting it in full. And then on top of that, we have added the museum auditorium operations into this budget, so there's $57,000 of revenue coming from that source. There's an increase in the emergency dispatching contract with AMR of $116,000 for 2015. And then we have increases in governmental revenues and miscellaneous revenues, which is really $71,000 from a lot of different sources. So again, the total increase, a little less than $2.6 million, a 4% increase over the 2014 general fund adopted budget. So I want to quickly go through our general fund reserve policy. This is based on 2014 numbers, so where we're at this year, our Tabor reserve is at 5.2%. Of the city's general fund operating expenses and revenues is $3.345 million. And so we target to have an 8% reserve on top of that. And that would be a $5.15 million reserve. And then we target to have on top of that another 3 to 8% stabilization reserve, which would be $1.9 to $5.1 million. So our target is anywhere from a 16.2 to 21.2% reserve, depending on how much stabilization we would have. So that's $10.4 million to $13.6 million based on 2014's numbers. So where we're at today is we, of course, have the Tabor reserve in place, the 5.2%, and on top of that, we have 5.1% funded at $3.3 million. We had intended to put an extra $500,000 on top of that in 2014. When the flood happened, we did not ever move that into the emergency reserve, instead appropriated it within the general fund. So some of that has been utilized, but I believe a little less than $400,000 or so is still not been utilized. And if that doesn't, in the long run, I don't know how long the long run is, but if that doesn't get utilized, then the intention would be to add that into the emergency reserves as well. So we have a 10.3% actual reserve based on, again, today's budget, the 2014 budget. So here's what we'd be looking at for 2015, and again, assumes the same Tabor size reserve, for now at least, but it's based on a larger budget, so it drops to 5% from 5.2%. But then using the same percentages of our reserve policy targets, it shows that a 16 to 21% reserve would be from $10.7 million to $14 million. So what we have now would be equal to about 9.9% based on the same numbers I just explained for 2014. at the $6.6 million level that exists today. And then we propose to add $500,000 more in this 2015 proposed budget to the emergency reserve, which would take us to 10.7%, almost $7.15 million. So this next slide, very confusing. Probably don't even want to try to explain it, but this is trying to show you where we start out with our fund balance for the end of 14 and the changes that occur to it and how we get up to $3.1 million of fund balance available for this year's budget. And it's based on, the projections of our revenue and expenses in 2014, adding on to that $1.405 million beginning balance. So out of that $3.1 million, we would put $500,000 into the reserves, as I just mentioned. We have $654,000 of transfers coming from other funds to the general fund to help pay for some of the one-time expenses that are to their benefit for those funds that are coming from the general fund. So that brings us up to $3.25 million. We have budgeted in this proposed budget. We have $2,862,000 of one-time expenses in the general fund, leaving miraculously $392,520 remaining fund balance. So, and then if we go to the next slide, council just so happens to have $392,520 of requests for council one time. So obviously we left that amount there for your discretion. I will point out this is we had $296,000 of council one-time expenses in the 2014 budget.
How much was that?
$296,000 was in 14's budget, and we do consider most of these expenses, since they seem to never really leave this list, but only get added to the list. So we do consider them to be part of the budget reset. So if you do fund $392,000 of requests, you will increase that budget reset gap by $100,000, the difference between last year and this year, in this number here for this year. Follow me on that?
So why is this part of the gap? It's part of the gap because we continue to fund those on an ongoing basis.
With one-time money.
With one-time money. And some of them used to be in the ongoing budget. So what happened was downturn, ongoing budget, moves to one-time funding. But as long as you keep funding them with one-time dollars, they really act like an ongoing expense that needs to be incorporated into the budget gap that we've been talking about.
Okay, so if there's no questions on that, wanted to show you, and if you can read this. Sorry, it's such a small slide, but we're trying to fit in here. Last year's, again, this $296,000 number is just a coincidence, but there was also that amount for other expenses with one-year commitment. These 7 or 8 different expenses that made that up in 2014's budget. Essentially, they're all funded elsewhere in the 2015 budget, either at the same level, or pretty close to the same level that they were in 14, or else at a greater amount in some cases. And some of them are either funded as, well, actually they're all funded as ongoing somewhere in the general fund. So, again, along with our budget reset efforts and the direction we've had for you in the past, we have moved these all towards a full funding status. When we come back on the 30th, we're going to highlight some of the more detail on some of the changes in service levels within the general fund, as well as the other operating funds. And we're going to tie back to you so that you can see what quartile each of these are, so that you understand from a prioritization standpoint where we're putting our new resource or ongoing resource dollars as far as which quartile these services all fall into. So don't have them here, but we will have them for you in 2 weeks. I don't think I could fit any more numbers on that one anyway. So that was it on the general fund. I'm going to move into a really quick, brief Public Safety Fund summary, unless you had questions on any of that general fund info.
Councilmember Finley?
Thank you, Mayor Coombs. I just had two questions. One, the 400,000 that we didn't use or we didn't put into our reserve last year, is that part of the 500,000 we plan to put in there this year, or is that in addition to?
No, Mayor Coombs, members of council, that actually is appropriated in 2014's budget. So if we don't spend it in 14, we'll set it as carryover in the general fund balance. But it's in addition to, on top of what we're putting in there this year.
And then you said that there have been errors in the calculations of property tax. Why is that?
Well, I don't have an answer to that.
And has it been fixed, I guess? Or can it be fixed? Or
Oh, yeah, I'm sure it's going to be fixed. So
can we encourage fixing it?
Oh, we're working with the county right now. So I don't want to try to speculate what caused that or what. We saw the difference in the valuation. We questioned it. We asked them to look at it. They found the difference. I think they're now looking to see, how did that happen? And I'm sure we're going to get that corrected. So that's the DDA valuation. So, but so I just had a little concern about the data integrity as a result of that.
I have concerns about that as well.
Right. So we're trying to stay on top of it, and I'm confident the county will come through for us.
Thank you.
Okay. So moving into public safety. Then this is attachment E. We have for you the Public Safety Fund pro forma. It shows kind of a projection outwards, I think, past 2000, up to 2023, future of this Public Safety Fund. We've got $5.62 million of sales and use tax projected for 2015 here as revenue, and then we have on top of that some grants and intergovernmental revenues and $175,000 from firing range operations. Those are the revenues for the 2015 budget for this fund. And then on top of that, our expenditures are $6.65 million. Includes 43.38 FTE throughout police, fire, communications, emergency management, children, youth resources, and graffiti removal. 2 new FTE being proposed in this budget for this year. One is in police and the other is in communications. There's one-time expenses of $258,000 for different police and fire needs. And on top of that, another $100,000 for improvements at the firing range. The firing range operations expenses are $370,000. They're offset by the $175,000, partially offset of the $175,000 of projected user fees that I referenced. They come from the both other governments and the public use of the facility.
So I've got a question about that. We've got something that provides $175,000 in revenue, but it costs us $370,000 to run it. Is that because did it cost us more to run for having it open to the public, or I understand the need for having a firing range, but that to me is a training expense. But if it's costing us a ton of money to have it open to the public, more than what we bring in for revenues, maybe we should consider not opening it to the public.
Well, so that's actually I've asked Mike to give me to look at a detailed breakdown in terms of what's really happening in terms of the financial position and what's causing that difference. And I think there's some things that we need to look at in that case. It's what is driving the delta in terms of revenue and expenses? Is that driver, does it need to be fee increases in order to manage that gap? Does it need to be, do we provide the service? Do we provide the service at the level that we're currently providing? I mean, there are a number of things that we need to look at, and that is something that I've asked them to work on.
Okay, thank you.
Mayor, can I ask?
Councilmember Levison.
Thank you, Mayor. However, I recall a couple of years ago when we were trying to assess investing in building a firing range, the other thing we did is look at what costs were going outside the city with expense for time and mileage, and also the closing of facility that officers were using for training. And what I recall was a persuasive argument is that we were actually going to save money. So I think that when we're looking at this, we should look at what our cost had been. There was a cost reduction. The other part of this situation is that I understand other areas are building, there are some private developers building training facilities now, and I'd like to know whether or not all those other facilities are being marketed to the pool of people that we thought were going to be potential revenue sources from other cities, and the federal government bringing their training here to Longmont at our range. So I guess I think we're getting into more competitive market. There had been nobody in the market at all with the facility, and we thought that was going to be our niche opening, and I'd like to see whether or not we can't bring in some of that additional revenue with those other parties we looked at as potential customers.
I think that's part of the evaluation that I requested, is really understand what's happening and what's driving the expenses, but what's happening on the revenue side that we may have projected that may not be coming forward, or how can we increase that? And so that's exactly what we're asking for.
Okay, moving on, other one-time expenses from this fund there, we have $350,000 for the lease on Fire Station Number 1, which you may recall we have two other fire stations that we use as collateral for that lease. And then $333,000 towards covered space for our larger equipment and vehicles, public safety vehicles that will be at the service center. And then finally, the public safety fund projections are that we would finish 2014 this year with a $1.83 million fund balance, and we have within that an 8% emergency reserve of $476,000. The budget for 2015 takes that fund balance down to $1.14 million. In future budgets, we have always projected $150,000 of one-time expenses annually. We just reassess that each year based on the growth, based on our projections versus actuals, and if there's more fund balance available, that's why you see us come back with a greater amount of one-time expenses in some years. And then finally, that lease on the fire station will end in 2020, which will also free up $350,000 more towards either potentially ongoing or one-time expenses in the future. So questions on the public safety fund? Okay, I'm going to ask Bobby King to come up and cover the compensation plan then.
Good evening, Mayor Coombs, members of council. Bobby King, City's Chief Human Resources Officer. Lori Chavez cannot be here this evening. She is working with her mom, moving her to assisted living, so I asked our thoughts and prayers about Lori and their family to move her mom to assisted living. Let's see, okay. Clicker's good. So we're going to talk about our comp philosophy, then our employee pay for 2015 recommendations, and then 2006 and beyond, as far as our thought process regarding moving pay forward. So our philosophy the last several years has really been a market-based philosophy to pay employees at market, which is considered 100% of a pay range. That philosophy hasn't changed for 2015, but what has changed, our recommendation is that we begin to define market as a competitive range for each position that we have in the city versus averaging of a pay range. In addition, we're suggesting that we change our pay ranges as well. And I think that's the next slide, which I have here. Okay, so our current definition of market, again, as I said, is really to look at the average of positions in the pay line. If you look at the last several pay plans the city has had. But going forward, we're looking at each unique position and what the market is paying for that position. We've had a lot of feedback the last several years from employees in terms of, am I really being paid for comparable work in other municipalities compared to what I'm doing for the city, as far as my unique position versus my position being average on the pay line with other positions that may not be compared to what the work that those employees do on a day-in, day-out basis. So we'll be looking at, again, market by position versus marketing of an average of a pay range by disparate positions. So in terms of the pay range, there was a practice, I'll say 2000-ish, the last 10 to 15 years, where a lot of organizations looked at, they call it broad banding. So they would take a wider spread of a pay range and put a lot of positions in that pay range to kind of minimize it from an administrative perspective as far as how they look at pay. But we did some research, Lori and I, over the last couple of years. We found out that, at least in the municipal space, and in some of the private sector companies, that those ranges were being reduced down to 90 to 110%, is where most of the market was paying each position, unique position in the market. So we had a pay range of a spread of, let's say, from 83 to 117%, which is 20% either way off the midpoint, which is our historical pay ranges. But the market data suggests that most employers, be it public or private, are paying between 90% and 110% of a range. So our recommendation is to move our pay ranges between 90 and 110% going forward. I think it's going to do a couple things for us. It's going to help us be more competitive on the front end versus trying to hire at 83% or below 90%. It's going to make us more, I think, fiscally responsible on the top end, where our ranges were up to 117%. A lot of employees say, I can't get to 117%. And was it fiscally prudent for us to even move pay toward above 110%? Maybe not. But the market is paying between 90 and 110. So that's our recommendation going forward. This graph shows, our current practice of looking at, again, a number of different positions on the pay line and what that spread will look like for current data. And you can see that this graph shows that our philosophy said let's move toward a market midpoint strategy. This kind of supports that. You see the bulk employees are at the 100%. If you took some deviation, say 5 or 10% off the midpoint, the lion's share of folks are between 95 and 105%. With a few outliers, south of 90% and north of 110%. So this just supports our current strategy. This slide shows if we look at salaries compared to position midpoint versus a salary that has averages of positions in midpoint, our current data suggests that if we look at position midpoints of about 320 employees, I'll say to the left of 100%, and 217 employees to the right of that. Now this is open range, not step, just open range positions, not including step. Okay. So we've been working hard trying to get folks to market midpoint. I mean, the study showed us that if we look at the current position midpoint, we have employees who are not at the market midpoint. And some are over the market midpoint still. Okay. As far as employee pay going forward, we'll give a brief overview. I'll talk about our surveys and how we've moved our survey confidence forward over the last couple of years. We'll talk about market position again, 2015 projections as far as where ranges are moving, where pay is moving, and then some recommendations. So again, the market is driven by the classifications as far as open range and step included. But open range positions allow us to create some movement in that market midpoint. And steps are based upon length of service. So if people meet certain criteria as far as performance, certifications, they move to that next step. But the top step is market in that scenario. As far as surveys, we've done a lot of work the last couple of years trying to, I'll say, improve our level of confidence that our directors have, that employees have on the surveys that we use. I mean, traditionally we use Mountain States Employers Council and CML. But based upon our recruiting area, I'll say supply and demand, how competitive a market space is as far as the department is concerned, we've had to expand our surveys. And we needed to do that for a lot of reasons. One, to be competitive, to have more accurate data, maybe have a larger sample. I'll say in the LPC space, I'll also really look at that market niche a little more specifically in terms of investor-owned, rural electric authorities, publicly owned utilities. Again, looking at surveys a little bit differently to make sure that we're very on target as far as comparing the right jobs with the right market with the right constraints. So these are just a list of surveys that we're using. And this list has been expanded over the last several years. Again, the goal was to increase the level of confidence that our management team and employees have in the survey data that we're using. This chart just shows comparison by job family in terms of comparing midpoints to midpoints and salaries to salaries. But the gist of this slide suggests that if you look at 100% as far as the midpoint is concerned, that we're pretty close as far as the standard deviation of being real close to that midpoint regarding pay ranges and also regarding salaries to salaries. I mean, overall, 99.3% citywide, 99.5% says that we're pretty much right on target as far as having a market-based philosophy that we're adhering to as an organization. Okay. So 2015 projections. And again, we use Mountain States data. This data comes out typically in June. It's re-verified usually in July or August as far as where the market is moving. And so for 2015, the projection as far as range is moving, as you can see, is 1.45%. As far as moving in salaries, the projection is about 2.95%. These are projections. Sometimes things change during the year. That projection could be plus or minus as far as actual data is concerned. I think historically, Jim kind of helped me. I think we've been pretty close to some of these projections as far as being pretty spot on. Not a lot of deviation from year to year. So we try to look at their data, get it close to the budget process as far as what we're looking as far as giving finance some good information as we go forward. So these are the two numbers we looked at as far as making our recommendations. So as far as recommendations, so for open range, non-collective bargain, we're proposing we adjust ranges by 1.45%. But in this scenario, we're adjusting every position midpoint by 1.5%, not the traditional salary ranges in the old pay plans. So each position by 1.45%. So we're also recommending a lump sum for employees who are either at midpoint or above. If you're full-time, $1,500, three-quarter time, $1,125, and half-time, $750. So these dollars are not added to base. This is a lump sum for those who are either at market or above market. So not adding the base. So those employees who are below market, so think back to the blue slide that had 320 employees to the left, 217 to the right. So those folks that are below market midpoint for their position, we're recommending up to a 5% increase in base, but not to exceed the midpoint of the new range, the new salary range. Okay. So in terms of collective bargaining open positions, and we have some open range positions in the bargaining unit. So we're recommending, again, an adjustment in the pay range, position range of 1.45%. The contract currently for FOP, for the bargaining, suggests a 2.5% increase in base pay. But for the open range folks, we're also recommending up to an additional 2.5% if they're below market. And the rationale for that is we've tried to keep those open range positions in the bargaining unit competitive to the market, and I have them slide back as we negotiate those contracts going forward. But that 2.5 plus 2.5 is the same as the up to 5% for the other open range employees. So we're not treating those folks any different than other open range employees. Okay. So again, as far as the step positions in the contract, again, this is already in the contract. So for police, a 2.5% increase in step, and for fire, 1.75% increase in steps. LPC also has step positions. So we'll look at those labor trade or step positions in LPC. The average increase is about 3.3%. I think the range was 3.2 to 3.7% when you look at the different positions in LPC. Trying to keep those positions in a competitive market as well. So as far as practices on 2016 and beyond, we talked about 2015 recommendations. So as we go forward, again, we have a current market midpoint philosophy. As a team, I think the recommendation is to look at that philosophy as far as does it still make fiscal sense, it still makes sense in terms of us being competitive, allows us to retain employees, is it fiscally responsible, is it sustainable long term as far as our philosophy is concerned. There's a lot of feeling on part of some employees that, how can I get paid above market midpoint? How can my base pay increase? But that's tied back to our philosophy. I think also in terms of compensation lingo, you look at philosophies and comp, you can lag the market, you can be even with the market, you can lead the market. So we've had an even strategy as far as base pay is concerned. And the question is, where do we want to position ourselves long term? Even, lead, lag, as far as base compensation is concerned. So again, the question, can employees who are meeting or exceeding expectations increase their base pay above market midpoint? A big question in mind of a lot of our employees. And then what can the city afford regarding paying above market midpoint? So if we look at that curve starting at midpoint, skewing to the right, how far can we go as far as paying employees that makes sense, is fiscally responsible, that's palatable for most citizens and for council. And we're still having discussions around that. Okay. So in addition to 2016 pay philosophy, we're looking at developing the criteria to award employees who make exceptional contributions. Actually, Harold's asked us to pull that in and try to make that happen this year. So we're still working on that as a team. But there's two caveats to that. Again, can I increase my base pay above market? And then two, are there rewards that we can put out to honor and recognize exceptional performance that are monetary and non-monetary? So we're still looking at those things.
I think when you talked about the monetary and non-monetary, I think what we're seeing as we look at, and I think some of this would be classified in generational views on this. We're definitely seeing that there are individuals that value time off more than financial increase, and so we're trying to look at what kind of toolbox can we put together that gives managers the ability to provide performance incentive or a performance-based reward that is meaningful to the individual. Because at the end of the day, the more meaningful it is to them, the more they're going to value what we're providing in that scenario. And we're just seeing that there's a lot of different views on that today versus I think what we've seen historically. And so we're trying to understand that and pull that together.
Thanks, Harold. Questions from council?
Well, one question I have is, could part of the compensation maybe be more flexible hours for certain employees that, work a lot of hours, but maybe want to have more freedom of the hours they work and don't necessarily have to, work an 8 to 5 or 9 to 5 job?
That is one of the solutions / proposals that's been presented in terms of how do we looking at that as one of the options.
Councilmember Wilson.
Another trend that I've become aware of is that younger generation employees might want to get that professional development and increased training opportunities. And I would suggest seeing if we can't work out a system to get people that professional development paid for. I think what it'll do is accelerate their love of job and their content area, if you will, and then also the benefit will come back to us with increased knowledge, efficiency, and maybe new energy for the whole department. And I think that adding to the certifications and credentials will enhance, in general, the operations and competencies across the board. Because when someone goes out and learns a bunch of new stuff and they're excited about it, they spread that knowledge around for people that haven't gone to take the additional certification training or coursework or whatever. So I would encourage being able to get people as part of enhanced compensation on a track where if somebody, maybe they only have an associate's degree, they want to have a little bit of tuition reimbursement or other things to get a bachelor's degree or to get a master's degree in an area would, I think, so much enhance the city operations and then allow them to stick with the city as far as their professional growth potential to move up in the organization. I think we cannot undervalue the aspect of loyalty and growth potential for certain employees that are wanting to be on that track.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mayor Combs. I guess I think this is great. What I heard tonight. And I'm going to give you some thoughts, but they're not necessarily critiques. So if you can take my comments in the form of a question and then just digest them, that'd be great. So it sounds like we're moving. So it just dawned on me that it sounds like the goal is to get everybody, not the pay grade, but the actual specific jobs at midpoint. Correct? That's what the policy is. So question number one is, where does the policy come from? Is that staff driven, or is that policy council driven?
So the policy, I believe, was, I'm hearing. Go
It's our
ahead.
financial policy, what Teresa's saying.
Where does the financial policy come from?
Mayor Coombs and Councilmember Bagley. So the financial policy, you're going to see those policies next week, I believe,
Okay.
are adopted by you, by council, every year as part of the budget process.
Okay, all right.
So let me kind of add on to that. So the policy that has existed is that we will pay market, and market is defined as the midpoint. The midpoint was defined as the one slide indicated. You have positions in a range that their average was calculated, and then they were averaged together to define the midpoint. And that's how that had worked. So what we talked to council about in the retreat on this was we didn't deviate from market. We didn't deviate from the midpoint being market. What we did do is go in and say the market is actually the midpoint for the specific positions. It's not an average of an average.
Right. And so I guess the thoughts that come to mind are, if you look at companies or cities, I wouldn't be any different, that are awesome. The data shows that if you're doing things right, you actually pay less than the others because people love working there. And so that's my first comment. And I'm not saying we should pay less to staff. I'm just saying that having a goal of always paying midpoint, even not from the pay grades, but the individuals, you're going to run into the problem that I'm seeing you guys struggling with, which is if you have a stellar employee, I'm going to look at, if Sarah's stellar and I'm average, and she's going to look at me and go, well, why am I getting paid what they are? And then you're looking, okay, well, if that's the question, what do we need to do to reward them? Then we're paying, then the financial policy by definition is we're now paying above midpoint. Because if we're paying our lowest performing employees, the midpoint, and then giving bonuses to those who are excellent or overachieving, mathematically we're now paying more than what the policy is. And so, and I think, I guess my thoughts are that, I don't have 300 employees, but I'm just looking at my little office. I've only got a dozen. And I've had to have hard discussions with other employees and say, well, wait a second, I want a raise. No, I'm not giving you a raise. Well, market average is this. Well, if you want the raise, I need you to do A, B, C, D, and E. You have the potential, but you're not there yet. And so you got to kick it in gear. And so I can't imagine that we've got 300 employees that all are right there. And so I guess my concern is by just, saying even with the specific position rather than the pay grade, we're gonna just reward you the midpoint. I still don't think it's fair for those who are better than they are. And I also think that we're overpaying some of our staff. That continues to be my concern. And so, that's good news. My comments, I'm only one council vote, but if I were an underperforming employee, I'd be thinking, oh crap. If I was an overperforming employee, I'd be like, yeah, that's fair. That's what I want. And so I'd like to see some type of flexibility. You're doing great, Bobby. That presentation was spot on. But I'd like to see some type of mechanism at a staff level where our supervisors are actually having a say, where it's not just a mathematical formula saying, everybody's at midpoint, are we there, and we just look at the data. I'd like to see some organic component where those who are responsible for hiring the team members are also responsible for saying, I'm paying you more and here's why, and I'm paying you less and here's why, even though it's a tough discussion.
And I think in that, can you cycle back? That is embedded in this bullet point.
Right.
In terms of how do we get there, and from a large perspective, what I have said in this case is we need this process but we need a process where we can maintain the integrity of the process, because inevitably, and I've seen this in multiple organizations, what ends up happening is you have a really strong system here. Then in other places, you start seeing everybody start moving into that. And so what I'm asking is for a framework that allows for what you just said to occur, but where there's integrity in the system, where it just doesn't start happening all over the place. And how do we manage that across 1,000 employees, and we're watching that very closely.
And I guess all I'm saying is that slide, develop criteria and a plan to reward employees who make exceptional contributions. Awesome. I'm just saying, if you take that and then merge it with everybody's going to be at the midpoint, we are now by definition paying more than the midpoint, because you have this, not the pay grades, but if you make the change, which is good, to the specific job responsibility, if they're all at midpoint and then you give bonuses, we are now paying above the midpoint on average. And so I was saying I'd like to also develop criteria and a plan to basically tell those employees who are making mediocre contributions that do not go above and beyond their primary job responsibilities, that they aren't rewarded for mediocrity. And I don't know how you do that, but I'd personally like to see a slide that does that too. It's not punishing, it's just fair. And I think that the private sector does that, and I don't think I don't see a difference between us and the private sector when it comes to basically how we compensate our people. Those are just my thoughts.
Appreciate the thoughts. My Councilmember Councilmember Bagley, what I was saying in response is that we analyzed performance data for the past 8 years of the city. And the data said that about 90% of employees were meeting or exceeding expectations. So let's say that the ratings were inflated by 10%. Then it says that 88% of employees are meeting or exceeding expectations. Let's say it's inflated by 20%. It will say that 78% of employees are meeting or exceeding expectations. So as far as employees to the left side of the tail, mediocre, not doing their job, those to the right side of the tail, knocking doors off, those are still small percents if you believe the data over the past 8 years. Okay. I think the other piece of guidance is that most organizations look at some deviation off of a midpoint, plus or minus 2, plus or minus 5, plus or minus 10. So we're having those kind of conversations to give us some range versus driving toward one data point.
Perfect. Cool. Thanks.
Other questions?
I guess I don't see any questions. I don't know if you're ready to address this, or I'll ask you this offline. I've got a question I'll ask offline about the defined benefit plan, but I don't have to ask it now.
Okay. So, thank you for the time.
Yeah.
Mayor Coombs, members of the council, I'm back for a couple more items, including the defined benefit plan. But I want to start with the health benefits fund, and there is some information both in your budget message and in your council communication for tonight on how that fund is operated. We explain how we put together the contributions towards that fund from different sources and all. So I'm going to skip that. You have that information. First, I asked Bobby to come back right up here to talk to you first and let you know about our 2015 cost for health benefits changes, and then I'll talk about the financial status of this fund.
So good news, we negotiated with Kaiser regarding our premium for 2015, and we have a flat rate, which is basically no increase for 2015. The minor change was in our drug portfolio as far as some prescription drugs. It's really a minor change for some employees regarding that, but the big picture is that our rates stay flat for 2015. Our negotiations really began with Kaiser proposing a 0.5% increase. We countered with a 0.5% decrease. We met in the middle. So I think next year we're going to ask for a 5% decrease and see where that takes us. But good news is no increase in medical premiums for next year with Kaiser.
Awesome.
So as you can imagine, that's good news for our health benefit fund. So I did put a pro forma in the council communication. It's attachment C. And we project, pending our claims experience next year, it's all now just based on our current level of experience. We do project a third straight year of surplus operations, which is a very good thing for our fund because we hadn't been in that position before that for a few years. Our health and dental benefit cost is 17% of our regular payroll costs, and hopefully we'll be able to maintain that going forward for a few more years. So unless you have any questions on the health benefit funds, I will move really briefly through our defined benefit plans. First, beginning with our old hire fire and police plans. The fire plan is 118% funded as of the beginning of this year. Police plan is 109% funded. So we are recommending no funding needing to be made to these plans in 2015. So as I mentioned before, that does save $100,000 of expenses in the 2015 budget for the general fund compared to what we were contributing to those funds in this year, 2014. So no contributions are required from an actuarial perspective for those plans. The general employees retirement plan is in a little bit different position. It is strongly funded, but it is at 93.1% as of the beginning of this year. The contribution requirement dropped from the previous year. It was 12.4% for 2014. It's dropping to 11.9% requirement for 2015. But we are recommending that we maintain our contribution level at 6.7% of payroll from the city, which is matched at 5.7% by employees. So it keeps us at 12.4%. And then hopefully that can combine with some favorable investment returns to continue to improve the status of this fund so that we can move it towards the 100% fully funded status. So that's all I had. I could try to answer any question on that defined benefit plan.
Well, historically, the employee contribution, started out in 2004 at 4.5, and the city was only contributing 2.7%. And then it got for many years where there was about equal 50-50 split. But in the last few years, it looks like the city now is contributing more than the employee.
So let me point out that is the comparison of the actuarially required contribution and not the actual amount of the city contribution. The city was always contributing actually 6% at least into that plan, despite the actuarial contribution.
Okay, that was just a requirement. That's not what we actually did.
So we went down to 5 in 2001, I believe, when we created our retirement health savings plan. And then since then, it's kind of creeped up. So we've always been either equal to or greater than employee contributions.
Okay, thank you.
Right, so that's all I had. Right, that's all I had on the budget tonight. So next week we will be bringing to you the financial policies for consideration. And since it's a regular meeting, we haven't put too much budget presentations on that agenda. We do have the 5th meeting of the month, or at least 5th Tuesday of the month, and we will be loading that up for the rest and most of our budget, remaining budget presentations, including the council one-time that I presented to you earlier tonight, and also some detail on service level changes in each of the funds. So we'll see you on the 30th.
Okay, thank you. So I guess now it's time for mayor and council comments. Councilmember Finley.
Thank you, Mayor Coombs. My business of the week this week is not a business, it's a nonprofit. The Our Center is having its Rock and Soul benefit this Saturday from 5 to 10 p.m. at their future home. It's certainly a worthy cause as they take care of those who cannot take care of themselves. So I'll see you all at the Rock and Soul benefit.
Councilmember Christensen.
I wanted to thank Marta Moreno of the Comité for inviting me to a delightful celebration downtown in Denver yesterday night to celebrate the 204th anniversary of Mexico's independence from Spain. It was put on every year by the consulate, the Mexican consulate, and it featured the symphony and giant mariachi band and the folklorico dancers and incredible singers. It was wonderful. Anyway, thank you again to El Comité.
Councilmember Moore.
Thank you, Mayor Coombs. Just a quick update from the Longmont Housing Authority. This morning we had a meeting at our normal monthly meeting. Got an update on the project going on at Prairie Village Phase 1. It's 60 units of elderly unit housing for those under 40%, and they're actually targeting under 30% of AMI. It'd be a good project. Great place. The neighborhood's all in favor of it, and they're really supporting it. It's turning out to be a $13 million project, of which they're only anticipating to be carrying about 12% debt load based on the financing that they're trying to get, which essentially makes it a permanently affordable project moving forward for Longmont. So it was good news. It's still looking like into 2016 before it's ready to move into, but it's well on its way. There's still some funding challenges, but they should be hearing back on that really soon, and I think that's going to work for Longmont. Thank you.
Councilmember Robinson.
Thank you, Mayor. Couple of things. On a sad note, I believe all of us received the message from Chief Butler that Beverly Title has passed, and she was the person who started this whole idea of restorative justice in Longmont. Great contributor to the community with vision and strength of purpose to get that program off and running, and we've seen over many years how it's made a positive contribution to a lot of people and influenced their lives and set them on the road to being great citizens and accountable. So thoughts and prayers to her family, and thanks for the work. A couple of other things. On a happy note, Friday afternoon, I received a phone call from the National League of Cities, and we have been awarded a CHAMPS grant, which is kind of the third go-around of some funds to help feed kids after school and in the summer. And we know from recent articles in the newspaper that there are groups going into schools right now and packing up grocery bags for kids to take home over the weekend because there's nothing in the cabinet at home to eat. And we'll hope to make a significant impact. And the other part of it is, you know, kids that are not hungry function better in school and do better in the neighborhood and at home, and I think it's going to be a wonderful opportunity for us. One other great piece of news is Aspen Center for Child Development, which is a program of the Our Center, has attained a 4-star, Qual-Star rated. It's now a 4-star, Qual-Star rated center. There are very few centers, that public or private, that get this 4-star rating. And Qual-Star is a system that's in place statewide, and it's a significant milestone for Aspen Center to meet this quality standard. And Aspen Center has many children who are whose parents qualify for tuition reimbursements and other things. And as we've heard Bob Smith talk to us about brain development, 0 to 3, these infants and toddlers in that care with those low teacher-student ratios, it's really setting these kids on a path for growth and positive life experiences from a very young age, and it will help mitigate the impacts of their the challenges of income that their parents have. So kudos to all the staff members in the Our Center for that award.
Councilmember Christensen. I forgot to mention that the Senior Center is having an open house from 2 to 4 this Saturday, and there'll be coffee and tea and food and
Dancing, always dancing.
always dancing, yes. They have a lot of programs there, and it's a wonderful place. As former council member Katie Witt said, it's the jewel of our community. Thank you.
Okay, well, I've got a couple of things. Tomorrow at 12 o'clock, Sheena Cannon and I are leading an employee walk for 30 minutes. So if anybody wants to come and join us and walk with us, we're going to meet down here at noon. I just said that so nobody's surprised, as we're council members, I consider what Gabe said at a discussion that he's an L, that we're all, he's for Longmont. And, I think pretty much I'm an L when I sit at this seat on most things. I've gotten a lot of Democrats pissed at me for, supporting the Synergy Road things, but I try to make my decisions when I sit here based on what's best for the most people of Longmont. And I think everybody that sits on this council does the same thing. Sometimes we might disagree with how to go from point A to point B, but I think we all want the same. But we do have this political season that's coming up, and I don't want anybody to be surprised. I did agree to have my name added to an op-ed piece that was kind of co-written by Bill Pinkham and Julie Van Dommelen. Bill Pinkham is the mayor of Estes Park, and Julie Van Dommelen is the ex-mayor of Lyons. And my name's also on this article, op-ed piece. But the last sentence of the first paragraph of that article clearly states that this is not anybody's city position. It's just our own personal opinions. So I did run this by Eugene May, and he said he was fine with it, that it was legal. So, but I just wanted to be, it's basically, the gist of it is that voting to shut down the government after a flood probably wasn't the best thing in the world that we could have done, basically. In summary. But anyway, I decided I'd give you guys a heads up that it's an article that may or may not be published, but I just wanted to let you know. So I guess that's it. City Manager, any comments?
No comments, Mayor Count. Oh, I do have one, Jim. I almost forgot it.
Mayor and members of council, we are out to bid for a new auditor for the city, and for a 5-year contract. We have 8 proposals that we've received, and we're looking for a volunteer to sit on an evaluation panel. Someone from the council will work with myself and a couple members of the finance department in choosing an auditor sometime next month. It's pretty open right now, so I could take more than one if you both interested.
I volunteer, but if they're going to fight for it, that's okay too.
Work for both of you then? I'll let you know. We'll send you copies of the proposals since we have them right now, so we'll get them out soon. Thanks very much.
As long as there's not a lot of talking.
All right, City Attorney, any comments?
No comments, Mayor.
Okay, this meeting will adjourn into executive session now. That's under not to speak. I wonder why that was put on my notes. No, so the meeting's adjourned. Period.